A little bit of a different approach today, but we'll run this experiment for a while and see how it feels. So, an idea that I came up with last night was to use the old voice memos and old notes as a source of inspiration for creating these videos, because I feel like as I continue to work on music, and where that just takes most of my day, right? If I just say I worked on music today, that's not really adding anything new. And so I think that looking at the self-reflection that I've already done, and looking at the lessons that I've learned, reminding myself of those lessons, building upon them, and then reintegrating that into my life is going to be a far more valuable approach to this, both for you and for me. And so the note that I came across today, just scrolled at random, picked the second one that I landed on. The premise of that note was that I need to stop with all of the endless caveats that I'm sure you're already familiar if you've watched any of these videos, but the way that I speak can be incredibly frustrating because I'm trying to be very nuanced and very precise. But I ceaselessly interrupt my train of thought at the expense of the actual message that I'm trying to deliver. And so it's important to be nuanced. It's important to be precise. And those levels of importance go up in direct correlation with how consequential the task is that I'm working on. But if I am so afraid of saying anything that's incorrect that I manage not to say anything at all, or if I am so consumed with getting every little bit of nuance that I have out of me that the whole thing just becomes convoluted. Like, one example of this is sometimes with my training clients, I will bring up how people are stretching without intention, right? And that stretching can definitely be a somewhat useful practice. It depends on the context of like how you want to apply it, right? Like if you're stretching to help your muscles relax a little bit, that looks very different than if you're stretching to create a legitimate flexibility adaptation. But one thing that I will say sometimes that I really need to stop saying because it just confuses people more than it's actually helpful, of where like I will see people doing extended static quad stretches right before they're about to squat heavy, and that's a really silly thing to do to like inhibit your muscle when you're about to try to ask it to operate at peak performance, right? Like that's the last thing that you want to do is inhibit the muscle right before that. And so it's all very context dependent though, because even though, let's say your hip adductor complex is also very involved in squatting, if it's disproportionately tight and it's causing issues with how your knee is tracking, then maybe you do want to inhibit a little bit of it for the path of motion of the exercise. And I could explain that better. That's oversimplified, but you get what I'm getting at. But that statement of like doing the extended static stretching right before you're about to squat is a bad thing. Like that's a very nuanced and like honestly, you'd have to do like really extended stretching, like hold it for egregious periods of time to see a noticeable performance impact for what the general population is doing. So it's not that useful in the context of most, and it just ends up being confusing. And so that's just one example of where, in my attempt to be nuanced, I'm actually just like making it super duper muddy and confusing people, where that really is not something that people need to worry about most of the time. Now, do they need to do a bunch of static stretching right before the exercise? no, I would say that they're far better off doing exercise-specific warm-ups and getting the muscle moving with lighter loads in a very focused way prior to engaging in the exercise that's challenging enough to create an adaptation, right? Like, I think that people overemphasize general warm-ups and kind of half-ass the exercise-specific warm-ups. That's usually what I see. But that is a much clearer directive and much more actionable for people than trying to give like all the layers. Like, yeah, if doing a little bit of cardio before your workout session helps you feel more warmed up, that's a totally fine thing to do. But the specific thing that you need to do for mitigating injury and for increasing your performance is getting all of your mechanics really, really solid and gradually building up, especially if you're going to be pushing it on heavier loads than you've done before than you typically do, right? And that does two things. Not only does it warm you up, but it also gives you an opportunity to see if there's anything that doesn't quite feel right on that day before you're going into the working weights. Like, something that I always say that's kind of a joke, but really not, of like, I will often have my clients warm up with elevated split squats because we are working on ankle mobility, we're getting the knee comfortable in that deep range of motion, and we're stretching out the opposite side hip flexor. But all of those things are beneficial. But also what I tell them is, like, we don't want to find out that you're having a bad knee day on your third walking lunge, right? Like, we would rather find that out right now, take whatever steps we need to take, and worst case scenario, we adjust our exercise selection a little bit if we need to, if there really is some knee pain going on. But you don't want to find that out like in the middle of a very challenging working set, because that's where people will try to power through the pain. And like, you gotta push yourself, you gotta be uncomfortable, like you gotta really dig into the burn. But burn is good, pain is bad. Anyway, so this is not really an exercise science video, but more my point is that when I am overly convoluted in my speech, that helps nobody. Not even me. And it's well-intentioned, but it's an area of substantial opportunity for me to improve on. And I think I've gotten better at it, but there's so much more room to grow. So that's what I'm going to be working on.